And welcome back to another episode, excuse me, of Building the Board. I am joined by Nick Demao and Luke O'Grady to talk about this year's safety class in the 2025 NFL Draft. Gentlemen, take it away.
All right, cool. Well, thanks for joining us, guys. Like you so eloquently put, my name's Nick. You can find me at Twitter at Sniper1154. My partner in crime here is going to be Luke O'Grady. You can see his handle at Luke O'Grady. I guess, Luke, I don't know where you want to begin. This is my second year for On Tap Sports doing the safety class, and we kind of touched on it in the pre-show, just how much stronger I think we both feel this class is than last year's class. Yep. Both at the top, I think, and just kind of mixed into day two and even into day three, you're going to find some really good values. So
I think so.
I don't know if you just want to jump right into it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we can just kind of lay out what the game plan is for those watchers.
Yeah.
We kind of want to do like a State of the Union. Like, what do the Bears kind of have at safety at the moment? Also, we just hired Dennis Allen, so the look of the safety, you'll kind of have an idea of what he wants in that defense, and it can kind of give us an idea of what we might be looking for in that draft. We can touch quickly on what we have in the draft, where our picks are, so kind of where you're trying to line up value with that prospect, and then go over some of the guys that we like.
Sure. So currently the Bears have Jaquan Brisker, who missed, was it 12 games last year with the concussions, and he's had concussion issues. So
yeah,
you got Jaquan Brisker and Kevin Byard are your starters. Byard's a little older, Brisker's oft injured. So at the top, you're a little shaky. You've got Hicks, who played well in mop-up duty. I thought played really well, actually, and then he got hurt. And then
I know
Mr. Simone Biles, Jonathan Owens, and then Tarvarius Moore. And I think Owens is probably more of a core special teamer. You're not anticipating a lot of snaps from him. He played a lot last year, but
he did. He was forced in the lineup, and he honestly played pretty serviceably when he needed to. When I look at the depth of that, I think that's like something nice to like. If you have to take snaps from Tarvarius Moore or Jonathan Owens or Elijah Hicks, like, I think you're doing okay. But I think if you're planning on Brisker playing a full season, or if you're planning on Byard to be your best safety of the two, you might be in a tough spot. And I think we're probably on the same page that we think that this might be something the Bears look to kind of hit hard in the draft.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's one of those dark horse areas of need. Everybody's pounding the table for both offensive and defensive line, and rightfully so. But I think safety is definitely, I think the secondary as a whole is a strength, but I do think safety, you can certainly reinforce it when you look at the two starters. And just I guess segueing into Dennis Allen's defense, he asks a lot of his safeties. I think of Malcolm Jenkins and how integral he was for the Saints, whether it's coming down and covering a tight end on the weak side, or those types of wrinkles he likes to throw in. And you don't want to be relying on Jonathan Owens in that regard. I think you want to find some.
You want your Tyrann Mathieu.
Exactly. You want your Tyrann Mathieu. You want your Malcolm Jenkins. You want those guys that can actually, like Malcolm Jenkins was a top cornerback prospect. So you want those guys that can cover. And I think both Byard and Brisker are okay are good at coverage. I think Brisker might be a little underrated at coverage, but again, it's health with him, and it's so tricky to kind of with concussions and missing as much as he did. It's tough to really know what you're going to get out of him. That being said, the Bears have picked 10, 39, 41, 72. So that's their first four picks in the first three rounds. What do you think they're going to do? Do you anticipate them using one of those picks on a safety, or two picks on a safety? No picks.
Yeah, it's tough. I think that depending on how many draft picks they might acquire to doing trade downs or anything before the draft, it might be one of those positions that they hit once, maybe. I think at the earliest around that third round pick and after. But you're right. I think Byard and Brisker can both kind of do that Swiss Army knife thing that you expect from the Dennis Allen type safeties. And I would, like, if they're healthy, I wouldn't be surprised if they were okay with rolling in with them as the starters. But when you're looking at who they might be looking at in the draft to fill that role, it's something important to remember. because you know you can have a guy that's like strictly a box guy, or a guy that's like a pretty just strict middle of the field safety, and they can be intriguing prospects, but you kind of want to match like what they're looking for with what they do well.
Exactly. I'm totally on board. I would be shocked if they spent 2 picks. I do remember this. Jaquan Brisker was kind of like a nice surprise when they drafted him, because I don't think they were anticipating him falling. I guess I know he was pegged as a late first rounder. He gets in the second round.
Yeah,
but I also
think the thing to remember too is that like safeties are kind of, they're not viewed the same way as the cornerbacks are. And you have to be a really, really crazy prospect as a safety to be a first round safety.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a really good point, actually, because it's one of those devalued positions for sure. You see a lot of the conversation with some of the cornerback prospects is, well, maybe they'll just move to safety. So it's kind of that like, it's like an offensive tackle that's like, well, his arms are too short.
Those
he'll move to guard. Yeah. So there's a few guys. I totally agree. I would be shocked if they took anybody at 10. That would be bonkers. I know there's some guys that we'll touch on that have got some mid first round grades is probably the earliest I would go on some of them. I've seen some guys, I've seen not experts, but some fans banging the table for some of these guys with the top 10 pick. And I'm like, I don't know if you want to, your return on investment's not going to be that great when you spend it on a safety.
Yeah.
I guess that being said, you just want to start digging into the prospects. We can kind of start at the top and work our way down if you want.
Hold on. Let's do that. If you want to just maybe like, I don't even know if, well, we'll get going on one of these prospects. I have to run out and grab my charger. I just saw my 10% battery thing.
No problem. I'll kind of get the ball rolling, and then I'll catch you up if you want.
Okay, I can jump in and cover.
Okay, cool.
Perfect. I'll be back in 30 seconds.
Okay, cool. Finally, I have so much bad stuff to say about him now that he's gone, too. No. So I can't speak for Luke. I know Malachi Starks is my top prospect at the safety class. But it's not as close as I thought it would. It's closer, I should say, than I thought it was going to be. Malachi Starks, he was a guy, I can't remember. His prospect or his rivals score was like one of the top in the nation when he was getting recruited. Of course, Georgia lands him. But he's the total package at Georgia. He's got good size. He's 6'0". Let's see, make sure I get the combine numbers because they'll fudge him on the 6'1", 197. So the height's good, top 61%. 197 is a little light, 25%, but not crazy. The shuttle was not good. It was 445. That was in the bottom 6%. So I don't know if, he's a fine athlete. He's a good athlete, very good athlete. I think the biggest difference between the 2023 tape when he was, after last year, he was probably everybody's unanimous number one safety. He played a lot more in the slot this year for Georgia. They lost some guys last year. They lost Bullard. Is that the safety that slot safety? I think he went to the Texans. I could be totally wrong. They lost a couple of guys in the secondary. So they moved him to nickel. They lost Kamari Lassiter. Lassiter went to the Texans. I forget where.
Jaquan Brisker, I forget where he went, but
might have been Green Bay. Was it Green Bay maybe?
It might have been. They drafted like 3 safeties.
But yes, he put 177 snaps in the slot last year. That number jumped to 271 this year. So they asked him to play in the slot more and in the box more. And I think that's kind of, if he has a weakness, I think sort of in the slot, he's going to highlight his weaknesses. Overall, I think he's a great prospect. I think his pursuit angles could use a little work. That was a big problem coming out of 2023 was how he would, the angles he would take to tackle. Clean that up a little bit this year, but I think, I was telling Luke, I was saying I had Starks as my top overall safety, but it was closer than I thought it was going to be. So I don't know what you thought of him.
I Yeah, I mean, I'm probably gonna be lower on Starks than a lot of people. I liked his game. I thought a lot of what you said is what I echoed as well. You know, they used him in a lot of different ways in that defense. He was actually kind of a bit of a linchpin type player, and it wouldn't surprise me if it's something that Dennis Allen would be interested in.
Yes.
But I thought when they played him a lot in the box and in the slot, but I thought, he could struggle a little bit in man. I thought, going backwards, he wasn't great. I thought he was a lot better going downhill, not scared to take on blocks. I think he's good with the game kind of in front of him. But I don't know if he's great in coverage. He almost kind of reminded me of Kaylee. Do you remember the DB Kaylee Ringo from Georgia a couple years ago?
Yeah.
Like great athletes. I don't know if they were great movers. But
right.
I think he has a better chance to be successful because if they play him as a strict box safety type player, like I think he could do that. I think if you asked him to be a straight coverage player, like play like cornerback, like Kaylee Ringo, it might be tough for them. I'm not sure that they have the movement skills.
Yeah, that's one thing I noticed, especially playing the slot. He could get turned around really easily, and I just don't know if he had the recovery speed to kind of make up when because you look at these guys and you got to project like a slot in college, you'll get the full gamut. But, when the NFL, you're going to have Ladd McConkey, Tank Dell. You're going to have these guys that are like jitterbugs. And it's, some of these, there's a couple of guys who had a lot of snaps in the slot that I think are getting projected as safety. And it's usually because of that. It's that, they're okay. They're, Malachi Starks can cover a tight end. But, are you going to drop him into the slot and cover a wide receiver? And that's where it's like, I don't know, it's dicey.
Exactly. I actually my thought was if you ask this guy to cover who's the slot receiver in San Diego or Los Angeles, the Chargers.
Is it Ladd McConkey or
exactly what I was thinking. I was like, Ladd McConkey would just do like horrible things to Malachi.
Yeah, there's practice footage of him doing it last
night.
But yeah, it's one of those, I think Malachi Starks, it's like all the Georgia defensive backs. Watching him reminds me of Kamari Lassiter, where you're like, I know this guy's got a high floor. I know he's getting coached well. He's playing elite competition. Yeah. He's going to be a guy that's probably going to be a 10-year starter in the NFL. Yep. But it's one of those things where I think, because he was so highly recruited, he was such a great track athlete in high school. You expected he was going to be one of these generational safeties, and he kind of gets talked about that, and I don't see that of him. I think there's actually better athletes in this class than Malachi Starks, and I think he's got the most polished game of a lot of the safeties, but I would struggle to put him in that elite tier of I have a first round grade on him, but it's definitely like a back half first round. For the Bears, in the context of them, I'd be shocked if they took him at 10. It is a guy I think Dennis Allen would love, but they'd have to trade back. And, even then it's going to be a hard sell to take a safety first. I don't know how that would go over in Chicago with some of the other needs they have, but good player.
It's hard to say, right? We don't know how Ben Johnson and Ryan Poles working together are going to attack this. He is, for some reason, he is looked at as one of maybe the more elite prospects in this draft, and I really don't know if I agree with that. But it wouldn't surprise me if if the Bears made that move. He's a very Dennis Allen type player.
Yeah,
and when Ben Johnson was in Detroit and was kind of manning up that offense, they took tight ends and running backs in some premium spots where usually you think that maybe they wouldn't. So. I hate to say that it wouldn't surprise me if maybe they considered him at 10, but I think I've seen more than a few people say that maybe there might be something there. So who knows?
Yeah, it's just looking at the rest of the class, and there's not that, last year I felt like it was Tyler Nubin, and then it was almost like a gulf between the next guys. This year, you can maybe get a Brian Branch or Kirby Joseph in the mid rounds, guys that are sort of, similar in makeup to what Ben Johnson had in Detroit, and not have to go for a guy like Starks and then, hope that's, I was high on Cam Kinchens last year, but I think he went in the 4th or 5th round. Yeah. I mean, and he was okay for the Rams, but he was far from a, polished starter. But that's kind of he was the safety 3 or 4 last year. So that's kind of the difference between those guys. So,
And that's going to be like inevitably going to be part of the reason why I think a lot of these guys might end up on my list higher than Malachi Starks, because, you know, despite the fact that maybe as players they might be close, like I got it. Like you think to yourself, like if you can get one in the first or one in the fourth, like then one starts to look way better.
Right. So I think we both agree he's good. It's just maybe a little overrated in this safety class, and I think it's just mostly based off of what he did in 2023, and then maybe a drop off this year. But yeah, still a good player.
Yep,
so I guess we can touch briefly on Kevin Winston. I don't know how much tape you've watched of him. I know he was so I guess I'll preface the whole thing. He missed most of this year with a partially torn ACL he suffered in practice. So going into this year, people were talking about him as if he could have been one of those first round safeties. So by missing a year, you're getting one less year of experience. I don't know. The tape is just probably, I've seen it echoed elsewhere, one of the best safety tackling prospects ever.
Yeah.
Like just the way he
football player.
Yeah. The way he, run fits, reading the run, diagnosing the guy could come in and be a legit, if this was like the 90s, he'd be an all-pro right off the bat. Because they just ask him to sit in the box and not cover anyone. And he's a good cover corner or good cover safety. I do think the deficiencies kind of show up. And that's the thing that was really disappointing about this year. So I guess before I get ahead of myself, just give you a couple of, he's 6'2", 215. So he's a big guy. He's a big safety. Like I said, he started 2 games this year, then tore his ACL in practice. So missed most of this year. But, one thing I thought that they were doing, especially in the West Virginia tape, they had him playing a lot more single high safety. And I thought that was one of his zone coverage and kind of knowing when to pass guys off and just his feel for zone coverage. I was really looking forward to him taking a jump this year.
Yeah.
I think he can man up pretty well. I definitely think, you don't have to worry about him in run defense. So he'd be an interesting pairing, like with a guy like Brisker, if you think Brisker has the coverage skills to, maybe shift out
to be a middle of the field guy.
Yeah. I don't know what the Bears think. I like Winston. I think he's a long strider, so he covers a lot of ground. And I mean, if you just want to see a guy with textbook tackling, I think through 3 years, I think he missed only 1 tackle and in his entire career. And and that was this year in 2 games. So he didn't miss any last year in a full slate of games. And I saw the missed tackle he made, and it was kind of it's one of those things where the guy's kind of already got a leg out of bounds and he's draped on him. And I think he kind of falls off. Yeah, he kind of falls off of him and the guy gets an extra yard. And I'm sure that was the missed tackle, but he's a legit run defending prospect. I just, I've seen people give him first round grades. I think I have him as my safety. I have him as my safety for 3 or 4. I have him and Watts like neck and neck. So, but he's met with the Bears. So they, I think, have some intrigue in him. I'm sure Dennis Allen thinks, here's a guy that can tackle anyone and he can man up on a tight end. He's big enough to do that. So, I would keep my eye on him, but I don't know. I would be shocked if they give one of those top 50 picks on him. He might be a guy that, if you can trade back and get into the back half of round 2, it'd be a little more palatable, especially because he's coming off an ACL. So I don't think he tested at the combine. So it's one of those things where it's a projection and you're hoping he builds off of what he did in 2023, but his rookie season is going to kind of be what you were hoping to see this year. So,
I think honestly for Bears fans, his game is similar to what we had with Adrian Amos for a long time.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Another Penn State guy. And like watching his tape, he really is an awesome prospect. And I think if he had another year this year, it would have been nice to see him take some steps forward. But a lot of what I loved about him was his explosion and his movement. And going down with an injury like that is unfortunate. It'd be interesting to see, where you could justify taking a player like that with that injury because of it. I bet it'll probably push him down the board a little bit. But again, he is kind of that role that you think Dennis Allen might like.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be interesting, especially because you would think the ACL it won't affect his ability to stop the run all that much. It's not gonna. You would think it shouldn't hamper him. It's just with the explosion and the short area burst. I know it'll be. It's going to be It's going to be dicey for any team to take him, but I also think it's one of the biggest risk rewards in the draft because I just don't see him slipping to like day 3. Like I would be, he's not going to. You could maybe, if you're the Bears, maybe you think he's getting there in round 3. Maybe you're thinking 72, he could be there.
Yeah. Well, like you got to think like Eddie Jackson had some of the best safety tape. I actually was watching it the other day, just kind of going back to try and get my bearings on like what I thought about some people versus people we know have worked out.
Right.
I'm like his tape at Alabama is so effing good. He does so much stuff good. And he got taken in I think the 4th round.
Yes,
he had that broken leg in the senior season. So, we've definitely seen it happen before where an injury can push someone really far down the board. And I think, if past even the 3rd round, he's still there, I probably would run to the podium, even though I think I'm with you. He might end up as probably safety 4 for me, but there's still a handful I need to watch.
And he said coming to the Bears would be a good spot for him just because he wouldn't be a starter. You would assume he could have a year to season and kind of, maybe they build a package around him for run stopping, obvious rundowns, and then kind of sprinkle him in as the year goes on.
I think if you were the Bears, though, honestly, it would bequeath you to act as if there's a good chance you don't have Brisker for the year. I've never seen a player in the NFL miss 12 games for a concussion.
Yeah, and he's had
that's not good. And
that's
if he does come back, he could be one stray hit away from being gone again for the season, and that might be a career thing at that point. So if I were the Bears, I think it very likely you won't start for them this year, or at least not right at the start of the season. But there's also a world where someone we take in the draft might have to start 12 games this year.
Yeah, it is crazy you mentioned that because Tua's had like 15 concussions, and I think the longest he's been out is like 8 games, 7.
Dude,
so it's weird. Like
this was like I remember even thinking like some of these Bears reporters should ask better questions because this is really weird.
Yeah, it was weird, and like Brisker was odd. He was cryptic on Twitter, so it got you to thinking like, is this like
he being held out?
Yeah, is they sabotaging the guy? Like, what's going on?
Yeah.
So, anyway, I like Winston, but he is a projection, and you're rolling the dice that you're going to get 2023 Kevin Winston and can work from that. But moving on, Sebastian Castro. I did it's so funny. I did his report. It was like the most engagement I've gotten on one of the prospects I've written.
Really?
And I was like, I didn't know how beloved Sebastian Castro was. Like, it's Iowa. It's and there's something about both Iowa and Penn State that they just like crap out solid football players because
totally. Well said.
It's there you go. Oaklawn native and a Hawkeye. It's true. So Castro's an interesting one because he played most of this year out of the slot. So
he's basically a nickel.
Yeah, you're grading him. I think a lot of people think he'll be a safety, like a strong safety at the next level. But he's another guy. The Bears have met with him. And I'm trying to think. I remember. Sorry, I was looking. Yeah, he had 10.5-inch hands, which were like I thought was it was in the top 93%. Yeah, because I was just like, but what I like, you can tell he uses those to his advantage because he's very aggressive in coverage, but he's only been penalized 3 times. So it's like he knows when to rein it in. He knows how to punch guys at the line of scrimmage. He knows how to take advantage of it. Really good instincts, really good ability to defend the run. And a guy that I think overall, so as far as NFL traits, nothing really jumps off the tape. I don't see an electric. I don't see anything that's like, oh, this guy's an electric athlete, but he's one of those guys that he's really good at a lot of things. that he'll carve out a role in the NFL. I'm not surprised the Bears talked to him because he definitely seems like the makeup of a player, like first guy in, last guy out type thing. So I can see why they would talk to him. I don't know. It's interesting because the stuff he does well, I think both Kyler Gordon and Jaquan Brisker do them better. So it's kind of like he's not going to be the Bears nickel corner. Kyler Gordon, there's a bunch of guys here that I think, part of the allure of some of this safety classes, you've got a lot of guys that can slide into nickel. Well, the Bears have one of the better nickels in the entire league. So, when you're sort of going through and grading these prospects based off of that, it makes it tough with Kyler Gordon because he can do so much out of that spot. So I like Castro. I just, he's another guy. I don't know what he would do. I don't know if the Bears actually, I know they've talked to him. I wonder if it was more of a, just kind of getting to know him type thing. See what they, I wonder how serious they are about him.
I think honestly, a different perspective to it would be that I would say for honestly, a lot of these prospects too, if they play similar to Brisker, it actually might be something to pay attention to.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Because it could be them saying, listen, at the moment, we don't really ever ask Brisker to play center field, really play deep coverage and sideline to sideline. And you couldn't really ever ask Castro to do that. That's just not who the player he is.
Right.
He's got really good quickness and movement skills and anticipation. But if you ask him to turn and cover a seam, he's in trouble.
Yeah.
People are faster than him. But that's kind of how we use Brisker right now. And if you were looking at, maybe we don't know exactly what we have in Brisker, someone like a Castro could be interesting in those middle rounds where it's almost that insurance, 3 weeks into the season, if we have to make a call, well, we have a guy that plays exactly like him and we don't have to ask Byard to change much. Yeah,
that's a good point. I do wonder how much they're weighing Brisker insurance versus what Dennis Allen wants. I think that, I'm sure they're blending both those needs accordingly. It is.
I think to some extent too, if you were Dennis Allen, a player like Brisker would be someone that would fit your mold to some extent. So I think there's a little bit of cross section there.
Yeah. And it's the fact they've met with both Winston and Castro. And I think both those guys being sort of sure tackling, run stuffing,
inside the box.
Yeah, it does sort of, validate your theory that, they might be looking for some Brisker insurance, just because he is unreliable at this point to, like you said, the guy's had so many concussions and got kept out of 3/4 of the last year. So I totally agree. So moving on, it kind of, I guess taking a left turn now, we've sort of talked about the box safeties. Xavier Watts now out of Notre Dame, another guy that I'm sure Bears fans are familiar with. He's kind of the deep center field safety that, middle of field safety that you were referencing earlier. Recruited as a wide receiver. And then I think Notre Dame tried to play him at linebacker, is what I read. And then last year was an All-American, had 7 interceptions last year, and then came back and then had 6 interceptions there. So 13 interceptions over 2 seasons. I mean, the guy's got insane ball skills. He can, move. His tape is a little up and down. And I don't mean that in you'll have a really good play with a really bad play, but you might just have some inconsistent technique with how he, carries guys over the middle of the field. But, I think he is in this class, he is one of the true, center field, free safety type, middle of the field kind of cover guys that you were discussing. So I we talk about the guys to replace Brisker, but I also think of, if you wanted to pair someone like Watts with a Brisker, someone that is so much more electric as a cover guy and just kind of see what you can do. And, maybe, I don't know if you want to get rid of Byard or just have Watts kind of waiting in the wings, but it's what makes the safety class so alluring. Cause I think we're both in agreement. They'll probably only take one, but you could make a case for, you could draft Watts and Winston back to back, and then you might have one of the better safety duos in the next 5 or 6 years. So,
I mean, I think when all things are said and done, it's either this guy or another player, but this guy will probably end up as safety one for me. I love Xavier Watts' game. He is just such a football player.
Yeah.
He is, like you said, he is a completely electric player in coverage. He's got great sense and he's got great break on the ball. He's also fun with the ball in his hand, which is always a treat.
Yeah.
He, like you said, some of that instinct and how good he is at feeling out the play, he can almost get ahead of himself and like put himself out of the play with like rushing it and being a little bit patient. So if he plays with a little bit better discipline, he could be like, I really think he could be like an all pro level corner. He's got incredible click and close and recognition. And like, sometimes doing those crazy safety things where you just bail on your job because the play is going somewhere else and you make the play.
Yeah.
Like you said, he's got 6 picks this year, 7 picks the year before, just like legitimately elite level playmaking ability. And I think those are the traits, that if I was drafting a safety, at least one that I'd want playing coverage for me, I would look at. I think that he could probably play down into the box more than he was, even though he did get a decent amount of box safety work.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the thing that's nice about having Kevin Byard is he's played so many roles in the NFL. If you wanted Kevin Byard to be a closer to the line of scrimmage type player, we used him like that a fair bit last year.
Yeah.
And like used him in blitzes and stuff. And you could still, if you wanted to, if Xavier Watts was there and the pick made sense with the value, I think you just take them and say, we have 2 great safeties in Byard and Watt. Honestly, if you took Watts, I think Brisker gets moved to the bench. Like that's how good of a prospect I think Watts is.
We talk about his up and down tape. The guy's been playing safety for 2 years? Like, this was a guy, like I said, recruited as a wide receiver. And that's how, the pre-snap route recognition is all his experience as a wide receiver kind of translating seamlessly to being safety.
Totally, he sees it.
Yeah, he sees it. And talk to Caleb Williams about Xavier Watts, because that 2023 Notre Dame, that 2023 Notre Dame USC game where Xavier Watts picks him off of the middle of the field. I'm sure Caleb Williams will tell you, how insane of a play that was. Because Caleb Williams, if you watch that play, he didn't even do the wrong thing necessarily. It's just a better play by the defender. And, I do think he gets knocked. I think he's going to be 25. So he's a little older prospect. But Castro's the same thing, but Castro's kind of, you're not going to, Watts has enough athleticism that you're not waiting for more traits to develop.
Right.
With older prospects, you're kind of like, okay, well, this is what the guy is.
You better be ready-made.
Yeah, exactly. And I think Watts fits that bill where just like Eddie Jackson was a 24, 25-year-old. Oh, it's 24.
Exactly.
Okay. So, but you get these older prospects, but if they're just that good and they're already athletic enough, you're not going to be worried about them stalling in development or not being able to catch up with NFL speed. So I think I had Watts. I think I might have safety 3, but I could be talked into him as safety 1 because, we talk about Malachi Starks and I think he does everything really well. I think Watts just is so electric at the cover game and just one of these guys that you can almost count on him every week to make a big play. And I don't think he's
totally,
you talk about players like that thinking, well, what's the but? Is he just a guy that's a huge liability? Is it the guy from Dallas, Trayvon Diggs? Is that his name? The cornerback who he had he'll have 8 picks, but then he'll give up 8 big plays. And he's a good cornerback, but you have guys like that they kind of balance out. They're good with the bad. I think Watts is just, I think he gets knocked for the play strength. I think people sort of assume he's only a cover safety, but like you alluded to, he's more than willing to help in the run game. So it's not like he shies away from it. Yeah. So, maybe you could put a little weight on him, add some strength at the NFL level and have a really good safety.
Yeah. And his tape is, the way he plays coverage is so good and so disciplined that it's he's not usually the guy to give up the big play because he's risking the big play. I think he had 6 picks and 0 touchdowns allowed this year.
Yeah. I mean, he was insane. It's for, like I said, for a guy that's played for 2 years, it's nuts. Kind of on that same line as a guy who was recruited to play one position and moved to another. So this is the combine darling, Nick Emmanwori, recruited to play linebacker at South Carolina.
Was he actually?
Yeah. And then what ended up happening was they had an injury in the secondary as a true freshman, and then he just slotted in and then never gave it up. And
It's
just
so funny you say that, dude. The very first note I wrote down watching his film, and I literally wrote, "This guy's a linebacker."
yeah, I mean, he is. Hugh and I talked about Demetrius Knight, who also went to South Carolina, and that guy, I don't know what is in the water, but these guys are built like tanks, and they just like and Emmanwori. I mean, so he's one of these guys. I've seen people talk about him going in the top 10, and I think that's total overreaction to the combine numbers. He's not a perfect safety prospect. He's a good safety I would say very good safety prospect. And the most encouraging thing about him is he's shown development in especially his zone coverage from year to year. So he's getting better at playing safety, but I think people see the combine numbers and they just lose their minds. I think he was all-time, well, it's on the screen right now, 10 RAS score, which is, whatever stock you put into that. I'm not leery of the RAS, but I'm always like, the Underwear Olympics, that's the combine. You watch the tape on some of these guys, and some of them play so much faster than what you would, Malachi Starks, a lot of these guys running 4.5s or 4.6s. You watch the tape and they play. It makes a difference if the guy doesn't have instincts or can't read something pre-snap. But some of these guys their football savvy is so high that they make up for whatever maybe their straight line speed is lacking. They make up for it with just knowing where to be as soon as the ball is snapped. And with Emmanwori, that's a part of his game he still needs to kind of refine, is the ability to, recognize things in zone. And like I said, he's getting better at it, but I would not be surprised if he's overdrafted. There's always like like Al Davis is dead, but his spirit lives on in some of these teams that fall in love with these guys that just have these insane measurables. For the Bears, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if I think he'd be a fit in Dennis Allen's scheme. I just don't know if he's the type of safety that they're going to look for when they're looking to kind of fill out that back end.
I am like all the way out on Nick Emmanwori. I don't want anything to do with him. I think, like you said, he's a linebacker. If you ask him to be your cornerback, you're gonna have a hard time. The thing is I think if you ask him to be your linebacker, you're gonna have a hard time. Like, he needs to add 15 pounds and play linebacker. I don't think he has the movement skills to play corner. I mean safety. I truly don't. Like, he may benefit from being able to play a strictly like down in the box safety role. And I think that like that, he could have a future doing that, but like he is like a classic, like gamed the system with his RAS score. Cause it's like the way this RAS score works is like on a straight linear level, the heavier and bigger you are, the better you are.
Mm-hmm.
So he's 6'3", 220, which I think, in my opinion, that's too big to play defensive back in the NFL.
It's crazy.
But he gets ranked as like a 9.9 because he's bigger than everybody else.
Right.
And on top of that, he went out and didn't do the agility drills.
Okay, I was just going to ask.
And it was like, I guarantee you, if he had done those agility drills, he would have gone from 10.0 down to like in the 7s.
Sorry.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. And like, I would get that, but even then, I still think that, if you're playing your safety at 226, like if you're going to have to ask him to cover like even like a Lad McConkey, McConkey would do bad things to Nick Emmanwori.
Yeah. It's so funny you mentioned he didn't do agility. I was just looking up what his agility scores were, because it's one of those things you watch him and it's no discredit to him, but TJ Tampa there was the same issue with TJ Tampa when you watched him. If you're not familiar with TJ Tampa, he was a cornerback out of Iowa State who was like 6'2" and built like the Predator. But you watch these guys and their hips and the way that they just move in short area bursts and change of direction, it's like they're stuck in glue. And I don't think Emmanwori is that bad, but running insane 4.38 straight line is not. It's the 40-yard dash when it comes to corners and safeties. I put, it might be indicative of recovery speed, but even then it's like, I don't really put a lot of stock into that. I don't think a lot of teams put a lot of stock into it because, they want to see what you can, Kamari Lassiter ran like a 4.6, I think, last year, but his three cone was out of, his shuttle was just legit, like elite. And that's what teams are looking for. They want to see your agility. I do think I wouldn't be surprised if he's the first safety off the board, only because I think some team will fall in love with the measurables.
Let them.
But yeah, I wouldn't say that I'm out on him. I have him as I like the development. I did like kind of the growth as a player, but yeah, it's one of those things where I sort of agree. He's definitely a hybrid linebacker, linebacker safety. And the last one of those that I can really remember was Taylor Mays. And that dude was bad, like, because he just was so big. He could not, he was the last hyped, I should say, hybrid safety linebacker. And, I can't remember where he went, but he fell in the draft. And then he just kind of never made much of an impact in the NFL because, you can be a great athlete from point A to point B, but it's a different animal when it comes to defensive back, and he just couldn't keep up with NFL speed.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about it earlier. I was really low on Kele Ringo for the same reason that it was like, I don't care if you run a 4.25, like there's almost like some people when they run that fast, it's like a feat of strength. And it's not like the same kind of gliding speed that you see on the field. It was like when Matt Golden ran it, and you're like, what do you mean you're a 4.29?
Yeah.
And it looks like it's like this like explosive, like I trained to run fast. And it's like, good for you. You're going to help your draft stock by running that fast. But like if you watched his tape, it's like he is just a strictly downhill guy. And it's now he may have a better chance to be successful because if playing safety is not the same as playing cornerback, and you can kind of live being extremely successful going downhill. And he is like, he takes on blocks extremely well. He's a great tackler. He does read and react with everything in front of him really well. But just at the NFL level, like I really do think he's probably going to get exposed in coverage.
I think so. Yeah, I certainly think, and especially if he does get overdrafted, some team is not going to want to just make him a situational sort of player. They're going to want him to be the total package. And I had the same concerns, especially watching him. You watch Malachi Starks, you watch Castro, these guys lined up in the nickel, and they were passable slot corners. They weren't, they're not elite slot corners, but in a pinch and in a certain situation, you could, even at the NFL, play them in that position. I really thought Emmanwori struggled when they asked him to sort of play slot. And
dude, all of his picks were like, what was anybody had any deal?
Yeah.
One of his picks, he gets burned so bad on a dig, and they're just so late throwing it.
Yes.
Like, if I was Emmanwori, I would message these video creators and say, like, get that play off my eye.
It's true. Like, I think I know exactly what you're referencing, because it was a bad throw and a late throw, and it was just, it was
like, dude, this guy was open for 6 seconds. It's not exactly as good as it looks.
Yeah, exactly. So I definitely, he's one of those guys. I can see I can see all the makings of why someone might like him. I just don't think I don't think he should be on the Bears radar because I really think he's just not what the Bears need. I think, I'd rather have Kevin Winston if you're going to get a guy who's just going to play in the box, because, and Kevin Winston, I think, moves even better as a safety than Emmanwori.
100%. Like, I almost feel like with Emmanwori, it's like, if you wanted to add a little bit weight and like have like an Ivan Pace type role, like a game wrecking like linebacker, like maybe, but I just think that as a safety, I think that he would be a liability for what you're asking a safety to do in the NFL a lot these days.
Yeah. I guarantee, I bet in like 2 years, we'll be hearing about whatever team drafted him is like asking him to put on 15 pounds. It'll be like Shea McClellan, the opposite Shea McClellan, where it's like they asked
tight end.
Yeah, exactly. So moving on, Malachi Moore, he was, I'm sure people know his name, another Malachi in the SEC. He's from Alabama. I've been looking up, sort of getting prepared for this. I like to see sort of like the consensus of where these guys are going. And he is one of these guys that he's like firmly in day 3. And it's a little shocking. I don't know if it's the back injury. I know he had some back issues at Alabama, and he's small. I mean, he's, I shouldn't say small as if it, but I mean, pulling up I'm looking at his he is in like the bottom 25 percentile at both height, weight, and arm length, which is he's 5'11", 196, and 29. So his arms aren't even 30 inches long, which is kind of tough. Hands are 9 inches, which is in the bottom third. So not great. I do think there's something to be said about a guy like him, similar to Castro, that's sort of the heart and soul of the Alabama defense. And he was another guy. He played a lot of slot corner when Nick Saban was there. Then he moved to safety. And he played that. I think he played the rover role, I think is what Alabama calls it. But I thought he moved well on tape. But he's another guy. He kind of is, who are we talking about that? I think maybe Malachi Starks. He is a Xavier Watts, very willing tackler, but can sometimes bounce off of guys. But whereas with Watts, I think it's more a technique and learning how to tackle because he's played his entire life as a wide receiver. With Malachi Moore, I don't know how much more you can add to his frame and, expect play strength to increase. I think he sort of is what he is. So I was shocked to see it was day 3. I could easily see him going in the, fourth. I thought he had 4th round tape on him. I didn't think it was, I guess 4th round now is technically day 3, isn't it? But like, I was seeing 5th, 6th, 7th round. And I just think, I thought he was a little better than some of those, I guess, projections might have led you to believe.
Yeah. I actually never. There's 2 on this list I haven't seen. I haven't actually got to watch Malachi Moore or Billy Bowman. So
that's okay. Like, both Moore and Bowman are guys that I think preseason had a lot more hype, and then the season played out the way it did, and they both kind of fell down draft board. We can kind of combine. We can talk about Billy Bowman now too, because I think him and Moore are very similar. Like, Bowman is another really tiny guy who's purely a cover safety. Like, and I think Xavier Watts is still the best pure free safety center field. I think Billy Bowman has the best range of the safeties when it comes to just his ability to cover the entire field.
Yep.
But I think Watts just has just better ball skills, better route recognition. Bowman was another guy at Oklahoma that I think people assumed would be maybe a higher, I don't think a lot of people anticipate the safety class being this good, because a lot of guys that were projected to be in like the top 8 or top 10 of safety rankings, they dropped, but it wasn't necessarily because they did poorly. It's just that other guys sort of elevated their game this year. And Billy Bowman kind of falls into that, but he's another one, 5'10", 192. So, I mean, that's a small safety. So like maybe he could move to slot because his cover skills are so good, or, he's a quick twitch sort of coverage guy, but I don't really know. He's not going to come in the box, and he's talk about both him and Mukuba coming up next. They both play with that same fire and intensity that Brisker plays with, but they're both small enough that I think I'm wondering how their bodies will hold up at the NFL level, because, Brisker's not small by any stretch of the imagination, but when you're going low on a Tommy Tremble, it's you're just not going to survive that. So both Bowman and, Mukuba's a little bit bigger, but I have concerns with both of them. And, talking about Mukuba. So I don't know what you think of Andrew Mukuba. I like him. I think the Bears have met with him. I'm not sure, Q, is that, maybe I'm totally wrong. Yes, they've met with, so the 3 on this list that the Bears have met with at the combine were Andrew Mukuba, Kevin Winston Jr., and Sebastian Castro. So
unreal.
Mukuba is sort of cut from a different cloth than the other 2. He's more of a cover safety. But he's also, I really like his ball skills. I think he, despite the shorter stature, he just kind of has a sixth sense for knowing where to be and disrupting pass plays.
Oh yeah.
He allowed a 12.1 passer rating against him out of all the safeties, which is insane. And a 26.1% forced incompletion percentage. Like, it's just, he's a really good, and Texas had a strong secondary. So, he benefited from playing against some guys that are going to get drafted in a couple months, or I guess in a month. So, I don't know. I'm curious what your thoughts about him are, because I'm a little concerned. I mean, if he was 2 inches taller and 20 pounds heavier with the play style, I think he'd be the clear-cut number one. But the size concerns and sort of just the aggressive play style that might not translate well to the NFL.
Yeah. I think he's my safety one.
Okay, so you're high on him too.
I just love his game. I could kind of care less. He's 186, he's 191, whatever he is. There are some really good safeties in the NFL right now that are around that 185 range that, it doesn't really bother me. And honestly, I'm not even really sure you touched on it. He's a bit of a terrible tackler.
Yeah.
And I'm okay with that. I was actually watching his game, and like you said, like his sense for coverage, his awareness it's the best in the class. I think he really is has the best coverage skills in the class. And it shows. I think you said a 20% forcing completion percentage. He had 5 picks, no touchdowns allowed. He had another 6 PBUs. And just making diagnosing and understanding, and they kind of let him free roam a little bit. And I saw so much Eddie Jackson in his game.
Yeah.
On the coverage side, and then also on the tackling side. He's a bit of a heat-seeking missile, and he wants to hit hard, but he's never wrapping up. He's always leading with his head, and if he doesn't blow you up, you're pretty much going to break the tackle.
Yeah.
But the stuff that you get with him on a coverage, if you want him to drop into the slot and cover your guy, your slot receiver one-on-one, I don't think he has any problem doing that. And then if you ask him to play middle of the field safety, I think he's probably the best in the class.
Yeah, and it's worth noting. So he only played 1 year at Texas. He played 3 or 4 years at Clemson, and I'm pretty sure I have to go back and look, but they almost played him exclusively in the slot. Yeah, so I'm looking at his PFF numbers now. He played 71 snaps this year in the slot, and then 315 last year at Clemson, and 243 the year before. So he went to and so he's kind of an interesting story. Just to touch on briefly. Family, he was born in Zimbabwe and then moved to Texas when he's 8 or 9. So that had to have been a major culture shift from Zimbabwe to seeking asylum in Texas. But I was watching an interview with him, and he was saying when he was getting recruited, he had narrowed it down to LSU, Texas, and Clemson. And the reason he didn't go to Texas was he had a feeling that recruiting, I guess, team, that coach was on the way out. And I can't remember who it was. Was it Brett Venables or whoever was there before Sarkisian? Yeah. So he went to Clemson, and he said the reason he transferred out of Clemson was he just figured he couldn't go any further at Clemson.
Oh, cool.
So he went to Texas, and then they shifted him over to safety. And I think that's his home. I think that's, we mentioned it earlier, kind of tongue in cheek about how if you can't play cornerback, they move you to safety. But I think with him, he could play nickel slot, he could play slot. It's just, they moved him to safety, and he just I think like you said, he's one of these guys that you sort of unlock his true potential when you let him roam and sort of read plays. And he's a very opportunistic safety who, I put in the report I wrote that if you had to circle one safety, I think the Bears could draft in the first 3 rounds. I really think they're going to be eyeing him. It'll be a matter of positional value. And do you want to use pick 39 or 41 on him and kind of how the draft shakes out? Because I do think, I could see both Malachi Starks and even, I still think Emmanwori might be one of these guys that at the end of the first round, they're both gone, or at the turn. I for sure think I think Starks will be gone in the first round. I could see maybe a team like Buffalo taking Emmanwori or something like that and seeing what they can get out of him. So then, do you want to take Andrew Mukuba? Are you worried about a run on safeties, or, maybe in the draft, maybe no safeties go in the first round? Then that's great. Maybe you can wait till, you can trade back and get a guy like him. But I think he can do everything Dennis Allen wants the safety to do in his defense. I think he's pretty well-rounded. Like I said, I have concerns about the heat-seeking missile and the size, but you can't. I'd rather have a guy that's too aggressive that maybe you kind of get him to rein it in a little bit than a guy that's timid and you have to kind of coach it up into him. So I would just let him be what he is. And he hasn't really had any injuries at college despite that. And he's played against elite competition. So it's not like he's, playing at some Division III school. He's going up against SEC competition. So I'm with you. Take him, Bears.
Yeah. I think, it depends on where the run on safety happens. I think looking at it like my where I would feel happy about us opening up the conversation is probably at that pick 72. It'll be interesting to see what the value is. It doesn't seem like he's being talked about as much as maybe I like him. Like it seems like maybe 2 or 3 safeties might go off the board before him. But if there is a run, it might end up being that one of those picks at the top of the second is something you have to look at.
Yeah. I could see the Bears really targeting him and Watts. And then maybe you see someone like Castro being a guy that is sort of like a backup plan. But I don't know, the Bears have such top heavy draft capital when you consider the 2 second round picks at the turn there, that I am wondering if they're going to try to trade back and at least maybe get something in the mid to back half of the second, pick up another, maybe like a 4th rounder or something. But I guess to round out the discussion, and this is a guy I haven't watched a ton of, but so I'll let you sort of take the lead on Lathan Ransom out of Ohio State.
Yeah, I mean, he's a good football player, and he's a fun football player to watch. He's got good instincts, and he's attacking, aggressive style. He was a pretty big. It looked like, at least from the tape I watched, that he was a bit of a spark plug for that defense.
Yes.
And you can use him in some fun ways. Like, I think you probably, like, if you were the Bears, you'd probably look at the way that he was used. And he was Ohio State, correct?
Yes.
And like a lot of that, and think, that's similar to some of the stuff that they did with, Tyrann Mathieu and with Dennis Allen in the past. But I just didn't, it seemed to me that he was like when you play Mario in Mario Kart and he's got like an 80 rating in every category, but nothing is above 80. It didn't look like any one thing that was elite. It was like, if you're looking to draft someone for a trait or to fill a role, like there'd be a lot of guys that you probably pick before him. But like, if you're in the 5th round and, you already have a good looking, safety room, but the value's there. And if you asked him, he could probably play both safety positions.
Mm-hmm.
I like it. I kind of like the value, but the thing is that, if you're drafting him to be, Swiss Army knife, you better have some guys that you like for when you really need a center field guy, or like you really need a box safety. I just don't know if he's, the man at either of those positions.
Yeah. I watched a little of him today, and I sort of echo your sentiment. I know, was it last year he had like plantar fasciitis or something? And I know it sort of shortened his season last year, but then he played all the games this year, so it didn't seem to really hold him back. I wonder if there's any lingering issues, because I know coming into this season, he was thought of much higher than sort of where he shook out when it comes to this time of year, and we're projecting all these guys. But yeah, there's a few guys, it'll be, there's a couple of guys like Ransom and Moore, and I think maybe even Bowman sort of in that like day 3 sort of discussion of, did the Bears address everything that, do they have a safety on the board, or is this, because I think Elijah Hicks, was he a 7th round? I feel like the Bears always have their like courtesy 7th round safety that they draft. Like it was that guy out of Stanford. Was it Kevin Williamson? They always just have that guy that they're like, we'll just take a dart throw on this guy. So I do wonder, with Moore, Mukuba, Ransom, it'll be interesting sort of what they address and where they want to go with depth, because as we touched on, they really don't have a lot of depth either at safety, and no one really, it's not just they don't have depth, they don't have any sort of developmental depth. Yeah. And, I certainly think with safety, those are kind of the guys that can become your core special teamers if they're not going to be, I think Elijah Hicks is one of these guys that he's turned into a sort of a reliable special teams guy, but I think his contract is up after this year. So, you're going to have to sort of replenish those guys as well. Ransom reminds me of, Q, maybe the guy, the linebacker out of Ohio State that we talked. I think it's Simon is his last name. Is it Corey Simon? I can't remember, but it was another Cody Simon. Yeah, he was another guy that was just like a solid football player that I don't know, when you get towards those like dart throws at the end of the draft and you just need to fill out the back end of your roster, I'm with you. Take some like high floor players that at the worst they can be special teams aces, and it's going to refill some much needed depth because I guess rounding it all out and circling back, the Bears just safety is going to be one of those positions they have to address, and they didn't really address it in free agency. I don't think they addressed it at all. And Tarvarius Moore, I don't know if I know he's a free agent signing, but he's not really, one of those. It's funny because it's a devalued position, but then you don't really see a ton of them come free on. You don't see a lot of the good safeties, ever since Landon Collins and Calvin Pryor got those deals or whatever. Well, it's sort of kind of become a position that once these guys get on teams, the teams tend to retain them, and the good ones don't really, other than like, Jesse Bates or something, it's rare for players like that to hit free agency. So, I don't know. Do you have any final thoughts, I guess, on the safety class, or just?
No, not really. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I think Ben Johnson being in the building might fundamentally change the way that the Bears approach the draft. And I think that's probably a good thing. But, in the past, Ryan Poles hasn't been scared to double tap on positions that he was interested in. He went Brisker, and then the next pick went Kyler Gordon. And then he went Dexter or Javon Dexter, and the next pick went
Pickens.
Yeah. I think, if depending on the way the board looks, like if he likes a couple of guys, and maybe if you trade back and get a couple of more spots in that third or fourth round, that it wouldn't surprise me if this is a position they double tap on.
Yeah, I remember having the discussion with Robert last year about we kind of were in the same agreement you and I are in, where we thought that third round pick when they ended up taking Kieran Amagaji was going to be maybe if they wanted to address safety. And I think we were both really high on Kalen Bullock coming out of USC, and he was a sort of like a Xavier Watts. I think Watts is a more well-rounded player, but I think that was sort of an opportunity the Bears might have missed, because I think a player like Bullock in the backfield, they don't have, they need. I think they just need playmakers, and that's one thing I'll be interested. With Ben Johnson, you hear that Brad Holmes talk about how I just want weapons on offense, and I think the same applies to defense. And a lot of these safeties have some ball hawking, difference making capabilities, and I think it'll be interesting what they end up doing, and what they, how the draft shakes out. We talk about that. They'll probably take like 6 defensive linemen or something, and then we'll circle back next year and talk ourselves into them drafting a safety. Q, I don't know if you have any final thoughts. I know you've kind of been the eye in the sky.
Yeah, no final thoughts from me, gentlemen. Really enjoyed the show. I'm definitely, after hearing you guys talk about him and not having watched any of them yet, Malachi Moore, I Google him. I see a picture of him. That dude looks jacked. I go to his PFF grades. I'm like, this dude started for 5 years essentially at Alabama and had like 5 picks as a true freshman.
Yeah.
You have my attention, Malachi. Yeah. So that's my final take.
It's one of these things. Yeah, he's an interesting guy, because I mean, like I said, he's gone through back injuries, but I don't know if it's just he couldn't replicate what he did when he was a freshman. But there's some guys,
he had a surgery before their bowl game.
After
the season.
Yeah,
for an injury that he was playing all season with. So so who knows with that? It's all undisclosed. But maybe Dave will have some info for us.
Yeah, they treat it like it's hockey injuries. It's like a upper body injury or something.
Yeah,
but. Cool. Well, Luke, Q, thanks for
good stuff, gentlemen,
chatting about it. Yeah, and
thanks for talking safeties with us, guys. And why don't we get out of here with a good old fashioned bear down?
Yeah, bear down.
I think the new one is the Bears. That's what all the kids are doing these days.
Oh, is that what the kids are doing?
Oh yeah, well, it's what Caleb and Rome are doing, right? You got to follow the leader.
The claw.
Yeah, the claw.
It's trademark. Can't do it now.
Adios.
All right, guys, take it easy.